So welcome to this Eco-Age panel with two incredible women to launch today the second installment of our report that we decided to do because in the last couple of years we all get very, very frustrated with the amount of greenwashing in sustainability reporting and all the claims that the brands are doing today. Sustainability is a very multifaceted issue. Obviously, it encompasses environmental, but also very much so social and the millions of people in supply chains, which are rarely considered when we talk about sustainability metrics. And so we decided to involve this, who we have today, Dorothee Baumann-Pauly, the director of the Center for Business and Human Rights in Geneva and head researcher of the Business and Human Rights at NYU Stern, and Veronica Bates-Kassatly, independent analyst. And we conducted an independent assessment of all the sustainability claims. And what came out was a fascinating and not very much surprising for us portrayal of almost the far west of sustainability reporting, that leaves the perfect fashionscape instead of landscape for greenwashing. So, Doro, do you want to talk about our collaboration, why we came together, and why you are so passionate as well about including the social aspect of the sustainability conversation?
Thanks, Livia. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Actually, my collaborator, it's the first time we meet in person. And I think we got put in touch through a joint colleague and friend, Red van Heerden, who put me onto Veronica's work a while ago, and I started following it and I started admiring it because of her no-nonsense look behind the facade of the many sustainability claims that brands now make. And as you, Livia, encouraged us to work together, I was thrilled to explore this and join forces of our strengths. I added indeed this human rights perspective on global supply chain management. And then with your strong networks and support, we put together this report, which I think is very much in line of the mission of the Geneva Center for Business Human Rights, because we want to support companies in making practical progress on managing human rights. And in the fashion context, clearly the focus is on global supply chains and in fiber supply chains, and we really take a deep dive in this report on the sustainability claims that brands make about these. So.
It's true, thank you. Sustainability is a question of science, which is physical science, political and economic science. And what we advocate is that it's time for fashion to turn to science rather than the other way around. Because as you taught me, even academic institutions like MIT look to fashion to provide sustainability data without ever considering whether this data is substantiated or not. And so what I love about what you talk about, the no-nonsense approach of Veronica, is that you unleash her and her investigative properties, and she goes back and traces every single claim the brands do. So don't mess up with Veronica is the first thing that I would say, but what have you discovered, Veronica? Where does this come from?
What have I discovered? First of all, thank you very much for having me. Great to be here. What have I discovered? I mean, in a nutshell, is that almost all the claims that are currently out there about fibers and fabrics being more or less sustainable is completely unsubstantiated. And when you look at it, you kind of wonder, well, what is the aim here? Because clearly, if, for instance, the main instrument of sustainability claims, if you will, fiber and fabric sustainability claims, is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and the HIG MSI, Material Sustainability Index. And this grouping was established by Patagonia and Walmart a very long time ago, 2010, Nike came in. So we're talking about people with an awful lot of money. And the first principle of LCAs, of life cycle analysis, is that if you want to compare them, they have to have all been produced with exactly the same boundaries and exactly the same methodology. So when I looked at this, I thought, well, hang on a second, why has nobody commissioned this? If this is what you really want, if you really want to make informed choices between fibers and fabrics, why has nobody commissioned this suite of LCAs. Nobody has. I mean, we're now 2022, it doesn't exist. So everyone is using random LCAs, which they pick and choose and put them in, and they claim that they represent something, and half the time they're out of date, they're unrepresentative. There's, the report goes into this obviously in great detail, and so you think, well, first of all, even if you're only looking at environmental impact, that's not substantiated, none of it is. And then as we keep pointing out, and this goes back to our first, Great Greenwashing Machine Part 1, there is a socio-economic aspect behind all of this, and it is ridiculous for people to say, for instance, the PEF is not supposed to measure socio-economic impact because that's not relevant. Well, of course it is. By definition, you're going to affect what people are going to buy, and that means you're going to affect the livelihoods of the people who produce it, and whether you want to consider it or not, you have to. And I think that's basically the message we're making with our reports, and we hope to keep making it, is that, guys, you're not looking at the right thing to begin with, and then what you are looking at, environmental impact, you're not even measuring properly.
So for those of you who don't know, PEF, that Veronica just hinted about, is the Product Environmental Footprint, proposed legislation that the EU Commission is currently evaluating in order to come up with a legislation truly that every single piece of clothing that will ever be produced will need to have a label, which is fantastic, substantiating the environmental claims. But, so while the initiative is incredible, the problem is that not only is only the environmental and not the socioeconomic, but also that, as you say, LCAs don't really.
Well, it's very difficult to get the right LCA in the first place. And I mean, we'd be talking about LCAs in general, but then also you have to have, really, if you want to look at the margin, you should have a consequential LCA, not an attributional LCA, which is the average. And that's not in there. So, I mean, all of this is really complex, and it's all in the report, so I don't really want to get bogged down in the details.
Yeah. Well,
Dora wants to say something.
No, I just wanted to add that the report, I hope, is timely, because it's indeed commendable that there's now legislation on the horizon. We do believe governments have a very important role to play here, yet it's important that they get it right. Otherwise, another round of wrong incentives are being set in stone, and that would be very unfortunate. So we really think now is the time to do robust research, scientific targets, and define what really counts in a comprehensive understanding of sustainability. Not a portion of the supply chain, not just green, but the comprehensive, complex and difficult picture of sustainability needs to be assessed from the most neutral, independent sources to then put the right things into legislation.
Well, unfortunately, this neutrality is not being seen yet. And the other thing that has not been seen yet is, on top of the environmental and social and how you measure that, the other thing that our report fortunately found out, for someone like me who loves old clothes, is that rarely in the impact is ever considered the impact per wear. I often talk about the price per wear, so why it actually makes no economic sense to buy something incredibly cheaply that then you use only a few times and throw away. But it's better to invest in quality pieces that then you keep for the rest of your life. That is not only good for your wallet, but also for the environment. So that impact per wear is something you are very passionate about as well.
Absolutely, and I think this is also one of the easiest things that you can communicate to people, is don't just look at the price at the till or the impact at the factory gate, which is what the fashion industry wants us all to look at. It's not the relevant metric. The relevant metric is the impact per wear. And as we point out in the report, if you buy something that in theory has an impact of 1,000 at the factory gate and you wear it 100 times, it's 10 per wear. If you buy something that supposedly has an impact of 20 and you only wear it once, it has an impact of 20 per wear. So if you just look at the factory gate, it looks like the 20 purchase is much more sustainable. It really isn't. And of course we then have all these, like, we want people to reuse and to resell. It's going to be very difficult to resell a £12 dress. I mean, how are you going to, the economics doesn't make sense. Whereas if you've bought 100, 20, 130, a really well-made garment, even if we're talking about thousands of pounds, these garments will have value when you're tired of them. And let's face it, fashion is supposed to be something fun. It's supposed to be something beautiful. We want to have joy in our lives. We want to have most people want to have some change in their wardrobe. But if you've got something that's a garment that's intrinsically worth something, someone else will buy it. and it makes economic sense for you to sell it. And so all these factors are just they're not considered at all. And I think it's really important that we should consider them. And obviously we have Inga and Klepp and Kassatly who did this very interesting study on a number of times different garments are worn, and they actually found a correlation between silk and the fact that people wear garments longer. So I mean, all of this is ignored when people talk about sustainability of fibres. They also find it's very important how many times you have to wash it between the wears, all the things. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I have a cotton shirt which I love, but it's such a pain to iron, I almost never wear it. Because I go, oh God, if I wear it, I've got to wash it and iron it. I can't bear it. So I don't, you know? And these are kind of like little things, but they make a big difference in how many times people are going to use their garments. So, and it's really easy to communicate to people.
It's true. And when you said also, the fashion industry wants us to believe this and that, but we also need to make almost like a step back, because for someone like us who has been operating sustainability in field and fashion for so many years, it's actually incredible to see how it has changed from, at least when we opened Eco-Age in 2007, we had to even explain to companies what sustainability even meant. Then we moved to the era of the CSR reporting and putting the cross on all the little boxes. So it is amazing and commendable today that fashion finally has started to understand that they need to be regulated, that they want to apply, sustainability measures. The problem is that, you can commit to science-based targets, but then if these are based upon the industry own evaluation, not or what does not constitute a preferred fiber, for example, like we are talking about fiber, and their own calculation of the emission and impacts of this, then we are in trouble, right? So the report also goes and proves and shows how the other problem that we have is more of a broader disinformation discussion in society, because then you have a big group, like a big fast fashion brand, for example, or a big sustainability brand like the HIG, shouting long enough and loud enough and getting the industry with them, and that then becomes truth. So how do we detangle that? How do we detangle the business interest from the scientific evidence? That's a question for Doro.
Indeed, the sustainable fashion claims are everywhere today, and so is the topic of disinformation. And our report highlights that also in the context of sustainable fashion, there's so much disinformation and that really misguides consumers and investors to put their money into de facto non-sustainable goods. And detangling that, I think, will take science. I mean, that's what it comes back to. Neutral, independent studies that brands, for example, could commission and then accept the results as they are, instead of creating metrics that are in favor of their often unsustainable business models. I mean, plastic fibers, polyester is cheap and it enables a fast fashion model. So, of course, it's not surprising that brand-driven initiatives conclude that plastic fibers are sustainable, and that just can't be.
That exactly, and this is also what the brilliant Changing Market report, Synthetic Anonymous, that came out last year proved. And I think our report goes even deeper in saying how, it's exactly what you said, because the synthetic fibers enable the fast fashion business model. There's also been an incredible push in the last few years to diminish the validity and shed a bad light on natural fibers, right, from wool to cotton. And I think one of my favorite stories, Veronica, is your 92% water saving for organic cotton, which is a very fascinating example of a complete fabrication. So do you want to just, I know it's a long story, but can we try and give a little snapshot of how this incredible myth happened? Because it's also the first thing that I learned when I started studying sustainability 12 years ago.
I mean, countless people have been told this and countless people have repeated it, and you kind of wonder, have you ever grown a pot plant on your balcony? How can you possibly believe that because you switched to organic soil and you didn't use chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides that somehow 92% less water was required? To me, I'm incredulous. But basically where this comes from is that Textile Exchange commissioned a study in LCA of organic cotton, reportedly of global organic cotton, that was published in 2014. And this study stated quite clearly that it could not be used to make comparative assertions under ISO standards. It stated quite clearly that it was discussing a prior LCA which had been produced by the same people for conventional cotton production, that it was discussing the two, that it was comparing the two for discussion purposes only, so it's saying we can't compare, we're only using this for discussion. And then it points out that there appears to be less water used in organic production, but this is because they looked primarily at irrigated cotton for the conventional study and primarily at rain-fed cotton for the organic. Well, obviously, if you're looking at rain-fed, you're going to see less irrigation. And it states quite clearly, therefore, the difference, the apparent difference in blue water consumption cannot be attributed to the cultivation system. That's what it says. It cannot be attributed. What happened? Nobody seems to have read this report. I mean, to me, it's fascinating. It's completely, I do not understand at all. But this study came out, and then shortly thereafter, Textile Exchange produced their own, that LCA is, I think, 88 pages long. They produced their 18-page summary. There are several pages of pictures. And in this report, they announced that this study found, i.e. the 2014 LCA, in 92% water saving in organic cultivation. Now, they put that in there. The study did not find it. Nobody seems to bother to check the primary source. Everyone simply picked up this Textile Exchange report, and we saw it coming out just last year. Transformers Foundation produced something on organic water consumption, and they referred to the Textile Exchange summary. This is a third-party summary. It is not a primary source. You do not go to a third party. You go to the primary source. I mean, what are these people thinking? Anyway, so this has been picked up by the HIGMSR, which cheerily announces that there's a 92% saving in cultivation, and therefore overall there's something like an 87% saving if you use organic cotton fabric as against conventional fabric. And this claim underpins, for instance, when H&M announced that they're going to double their output by 2030, they're going to halve the impact. How are they calculating it? They are claiming that by bunging in organic cotton, they're reducing water consumption in cultivation by 92%. And they also claim that they're reducing GWP, because this is another story, and it's also in the report, which I'd urge people to read. They don't include, correction, they do not include the upstream impact of manure. Now, manure has really serious GWP connotations, and they just aren't in the organic state. Now, the 2014 LCA itself points this out, and points out that if you include it, then you totally change the picture. There's a recent report by the UNFCCC, the United Nations Fashion Council for Climate Change, I think it is, which basically makes the same point. And yet, there it is, it's still in the HIGMSI, it still underpins the claims that what's called the World Resources Institute produced this great study claiming how fashion is going to correct its impact based on this. But it's self-evident. Nothing is going to be corrected by switching from conventional to organic. Nothing.
If you add the humans and you look at how much are they earning once they are switching to cultivating cotton the organic way, that is completely overlooked as well, because they often have fewer productivity, have to work harder, and their income is diminishing. Because also the price for organic cotton, the market is the same, cotton is cotton. So they're not earning more unless someone is willing to pay a premium. But for the people, the smallholder farmers that sometimes cultivate cotton, it's not an added benefit for their socioeconomic development.
So how do we move from here? Because I think in the first report and in the second one that we're launching today, we detangle a lot of these things. We unleash your powers, and Veronica, you really go down, and and we had our report validated by different parties as well. So we have been put on crosses and fact checked in every single thing. So apart from please distribute the reports wide and far, how do we move forward? Because we make some recommendations, But obviously what we are advocating is that the multi-stakeholder initiatives and the regulations really matter. So how do we go from here?
We are essentially asking for a systems change. So I think we also need to be humble in that we don't know all aspects that need to change. We highlighted many of the things that go wrong, and we have some ideas what needs to happen. But I think to follow up from this report, I would, after all, we want to invite a conversation amongst experts and key stakeholders to figure out a way forward. And what we're suggesting is to come up with a protocol for making sustainability statements. So it should not be allowed to make any claims without data. And I
That
think
can be substantiated.
that can be substantiated. And I think there could be a protocol for what it takes before you actually put something out publicly and potentially misguide consumers and investors that we actually want to empower. We want to empower them to reward the best companies. And right now this is awfully difficult for consumers and investors, and this needs to change. So a protocol for what steps a brand needs to go through before they make such public claims would be something that could be collaboratively developed, and it must include independent scientific studies, the right reference points. It can't just be a random life cycle analysis that has nothing to do with current production. So I think
I'm going to ask a little bit of a difficult or a cheeky question, which is, this is exactly what we need. But how do we deal with the bodies like the Higg Index that now claim that they are the truth of sustainability metrics, and that they're regulating and kind of like infiltrating a lot of fashion brands, and like they have to measure against the Higg. If we found out that the Higg is so flawed, so sorry Higg Index, but how do we move from here when people say, well, there is already a body and it is that?
I mean, I think that's basically the aim of our report. You know, that's what we're. You know, I'm an analyst. I just look at the claims and I look at whether they're substantiated, and they are not. Now, I've put my information out there. If I'm wrong, the Hague Textile Exchange, all these people can come to us and say, guys, you're wrong. Well, you know, I don't think they're going to. But you know, I think that what I personally think is we have to persuade the brands. The brands are the drivers here. We have to convince the brands, and I think Dora has a lot. There is a risk, as Dora, we were discussing this the other day, so maybe Dora wants to elaborate on this.
Yeah, indeed. Our report, I think, highlights some inconvenient truth for powerful actors in the industry. However, I do believe it's in the interest of individual brands to get it right, because the consumers are increasingly sensitive to these claims, and the students that I teach are so keen to learn about sustainability and how all this gets together, and they're increasingly suspicious as well. So I think companies that make non-substantiated claims, they sit on a ticking time bomb, in that eventually a story will break that shows that this is all bogus. And this is very dangerous for them, because the credibility that they built up for years can be lost in a matter of one day of an internet campaign. And they don't want this to happen. I really think they need to figure out more robust sustainability, not just public claims, but actually business models. They need to do this first. Now, this is the most sustainable business approach to them for their business sustainability. So they shouldn't run the risk. And so it's in their interest to get it right, and they could start commissioning independent studies. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking with us. The Inconvenient Truth, we always love that. And the Great Greenwashing Machine, Part 1 and Part 2 will be available on the Eco-Age website, and I'm sure on the Geneva,
of course, yes,
Business and Human Rights Center, on Veronica's website, I think everywhere.
Yes.
So you can't miss it. Please download it, read it, write to us if you find that anything that we wrote is unsubstantiated or not truth. Please let us know. Thank you.